People ask the wrong question about Marilyn Monroe. They ask who hurt her. The real question is, why did she keep choosing men who made her feel unsafe? Marilyn Monroe didn't fall into danger by accident. She was drawn to it, not because she wanted pain, but because danger felt familiar. And once you understand why the human brain mistakes fear for love, Marilyn's entire life suddenly makes terrifying sense. If you've ever wondered why safe love can feel boring but chaos feels magnetic, this is why. And by the end, you'll recognize the three relationship patterns trauma survivors repeat, even when they swear they won't. Because once you see these patterns, you'll start recognizing them everywhere, not just in Marilyn. We can't diagnose Marilyn, but we can recognize patterns trauma research has documented for decades. The human brain has one job it takes more seriously than happiness, more seriously than love, more seriously than safety itself. That job is pattern recognition. From the moment we're born, our nervous system begins mapping the world, learning what normal feels like, what relationships sound like, what love is supposed to be. And here's the devastating truth that shaped Marilyn Monroe's entire romantic life. The brain often seeks what's familiar, especially under stress. In the sprawling foster care system of 1930s Los Angeles, a little girl named Norma Jean learned her first lessons about love. She learned that adults disappear. She learned that affection comes with conditions. She learned that safety is temporary, that kindness can evaporate overnight, that the people who say they care can hand you to strangers without explanation. Her nervous system absorbed these lessons the way lungs absorb oxygen, building them into the very architecture of how she would experience intimacy for the rest of her life. By the time Norma Jean became Marilyn, by the time the world knew her face better than their own reflections, something fundamental had already been wired into her system. Chaos felt like home, uncertainty felt like truth, and the steady, predictable kindness that other women craved felt wrong to her, felt suspicious, felt like the calm before an inevitable abandonment. Her nervous system could start to interpret calm as temporary, as the calm before the next loss. The men who would shape her adult life, the ones who would make headlines and break her heart and ultimately contribute to her destruction, weren't random accidents. They fit a pattern her nervous system already recognized. Arthur Miller with his intellectual distance and emotional reserve, Joe DiMaggio with his jealous rages and need for control. Each one represented a different flavor of the same dynamic, and Marilyn's nervous system recognized that dynamic as something essential, something that felt more like love than actual love ever could. Here's what most people don't understand about trauma and attachment. Safety doesn't always feel safe to someone whose childhood was defined by chaos. Safety can feel wrong. It can feel boring at best, threatening at worst. For Marilyn Monroe, a man who was predictable, who showed up when he said he would, who didn't play games or disappear or rage or demand, that man could trigger something in her nervous system that most people would find shocking. That man might make her anxious. The human brain operates on a principle called neuroception, a process happening below conscious awareness where our nervous system constantly scans the environment for cues of safety or danger. For most people, a calm partner, a stable relationship, predictable kindness, these things send signals of safety. The nervous system relaxes, connection deepens. But for someone like Marilyn, whose early development occurred in an environment of relentless uncertainty, the nervous system learned a different lesson. It learned that calm is often what happens before the storm. Silence is what can precede abandonment. Stability might be the setup for devastating loss. When Marilyn met men who treated her well without drama, without intensity, without the push and pull of chaos, her nervous system didn't always interpret this as love. It could interpret it as the absence of information. And the absence of information to a brain trained in foster care survival can be terrifying. It's the moment before the social worker arrives. It's the quiet before you're told to pack your things. It's the calm before you learn you're being moved again, that the people you started to trust have decided they don't want you after all. So when a genuinely kind man showed interest in Marilyn, when someone stable and emotionally available entered her life, something devastating could happen. Instead of feeling relief, she might feel dread. Instead of feeling attracted, she might feel nothing. Or worse, she might feel repulsion. Her nervous system, doing the only job it knew how to do, could reject him. Not because he was wrong for her, but because he was right, and right felt like a language she'd never learned to speak. The brain often seeks what it knows, and what Marilyn knew was chaos. Dangerous men provided something that safe men couldn't: intensity. And for a nervous system calibrated to chaos, intensity can feel exactly like connection. It feels like being seen, being wanted, being alive. The jealous rage of Joe DiMaggio after the famous subway-grate scene, when photographers captured Marilyn's dress billowing above her waist and DiMaggio's face darkened with possessive fury, that rage told Marilyn something her nervous system desperately needed to hear. It told her she mattered. It told her someone cared enough to lose control. It told her she was valuable enough to fight over. Safe men don't lose control. Safe men don't explode with jealousy. Safe men talk about feelings calmly, set boundaries respectfully, give space generously, and every single one of those behaviors, those markers of emotional health, could feel empty to Marilyn. They might feel like the polite distance of foster parents who never really wanted her in the first place. They could feel like people going through the motions, saying the right things while already planning their exit. But men with volatility and the capacity for emotional storms, they provided something visceral. They provided adrenaline. They provided the familiar cocktail of fear and excitement that Marilyn's body had learned to associate with being alive. When Arthur Miller looked at her with that intellectual reserve, that subtle emotional distance that suggested she wasn't quite part of his world, it hurt. But it also felt real. It felt like a challenge she needed to meet, a test she needed to pass, a dynamic she understood. Love, in Marilyn's experience, was something you had to earn over and over, something that could be withdrawn at any moment, something that required constant performance and perfect behavior, and even then might disappear. Some of the men around her represented power, secrecy, and guaranteed unavailability. And for someone wired by early abandonment, unavailable love can feel familiar because it recreates the same emotional math: craving, waiting, uncertainty, and loss. Whether rumored or documented, the pattern is the point. Here were men who couldn't possibly stay, men whose very positions often guaranteed they could be emotionally unavailable and leave. Every logical part of Marilyn's brain must have known these dynamics were destructive, but logic doesn't live in the nervous system. The nervous system doesn't care about outcomes, it cares about patterns. And the pattern of being wanted by someone who can't really be yours, that pattern felt like home. The most devastating trick that trauma can play on the human heart is this: it teaches people to mistake control for love. And Marilyn Monroe seems to have encountered this dynamic over and over with nearly every significant man in her life. When Joe DiMaggio dictated what she could wear, who she could see, what roles she could take, Marilyn's rational mind might have recognized this as controlling behavior. But her nervous system could interpret it differently. Her nervous system might hear, "You're mine. You're not going anywhere. I won't let you leave." And to a woman whose childhood was defined by being handed from home to home, being disposable, being forgettable, that possessiveness could feel like the deepest form of care. Control says, "I'm watching you." And when you've spent your childhood invisible, being watched can feel like being seen. Control says, "I need to know where you are at all times." And when you've spent your life feeling like you don't matter, being needed can feel like being valued. Control says, "No one else can have you." And when you've spent your existence feeling like no one really wanted you in the first place, being claimed can feel like being chosen. The tragedy is that Marilyn likely felt the difference, somewhere deep inside, between genuine love and controlling obsession. There are moments in interviews, flashes in photographs, times when you can see her recognizing that something is wrong, that this isn't how love is supposed to feel, but recognizing a pattern and being able to break it are two entirely different things. Her nervous system was running software written in childhood, code that said familiar danger might feel safer than unfamiliar peace, and that code was nearly impossible to override. When Arthur Miller married her, there was genuine hope that maybe this time would be different. Miller was intellectual, creative, supposedly evolved beyond the brutish jealousy of DiMaggio. But Miller brought his own brand of control, more subtle but equally damaging. He controlled her intellectually, made her feel small, made her feel like she needed to prove her intelligence, her worth, her right to be in his world. He controlled through distance, through withdrawal, through the devastating power of making someone feel like they're never quite enough. And Marilyn, reading these signals through a nervous system trained in abandonment, responded the only way she knew how. She tried harder, she performed better, she twisted herself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit into the space Miller seemed willing to give her. She may not have recognized this as abuse, because abuse, in her experience, was what adults in her childhood had done. This felt different. This felt like love with conditions, and love with conditions was the only kind of love her nervous system knew how to recognize. People always ask the wrong question about victims of destructive relationships, about people trapped in patterns destroying them, about women like Marilyn who seemed to have everything and yet couldn't escape. They ask, why didn't she just leave? But that question reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how trauma works, how the nervous system operates, how the brain responds to threats both real and perceived. For Marilyn Monroe, leaving a dangerous man wasn't a simple choice between safety and danger. It was a choice between known danger and unknown terror. The known danger of a controlling, volatile, emotionally difficult man was terrible. Yes, it was painful and destructive, and slowly killing something essential inside her. But it was familiar. She knew its rhythms. She knew what to expect. She had strategies, however flawed, for managing it. She had a role to play, a way to be, a set of behaviors that sometimes, if she performed them perfectly enough, could earn her temporary peace. Unknown territory, the territory of being alone, of choosing differently, of trusting someone who felt safe. That territory held fears her nervous system couldn't easily process. Being alone might mean facing the thing she'd been running from since childhood, the terrifying possibility that she was, at her core, unlovable. That the reason people left, the reason her mother couldn't keep her, the reason foster families passed her along, wasn't about circumstances or bad luck or systems. It was about her. Something fundamentally wrong with her that made her unworthy of staying. A dangerous man, paradoxically, could protect her from that fear. If a man was cruel, if he controlled her, if he raged at her, if he used her, then his eventual leaving wouldn't necessarily be about her essential unworthiness. It could be about his problems, his dysfunction, his issues. She could blame the chaos, blame the circumstances, blame anything except the deep fear that she was simply not enough to make someone stay. This is why Marilyn often chose men who seemed guaranteed to hurt her. Not because she was weak, not because she was foolish, not because she didn't know better, but because her nervous system, in its desperate attempt to protect her from the worst pain she could imagine, kept steering her toward familiar pain instead. The devil you know can feel safer than the angel you don't, especially when every angel in your childhood eventually revealed themselves to be just another person who would leave. I'm not here to prove a conspiracy. I'm here to show how a pattern can end in a place like Calneva. By the time Marilyn Monroe found herself at Calneva Lodge in the summer of 1962, the pattern had reached what many believe was its most destructive point. Calneva wasn't shocking because it was new or unexpected. It was shocking because it appeared to be the most concentrated version of everything that had been destroying her all along. The people around her that weekend seemed to have represented every dangerous element that Marilyn's nervous system had learned to crave: power, volatility, unavailability, intensity, and the intoxicating combination of being wanted and being discarded in almost the same breath. She'd been fired from her last film. Her relationships had crumbled. Her dependence on pills had reached a crisis point. She was, by every measure that matters, in desperate need of safety, stability, genuine care. And yet she found herself at Calneva, in situations that any objective observer would recognize as destructive, because her nervous system likely wasn't looking for safety, it was looking for the familiar. And the familiar, for Marilyn, had always been people who hurt her, while claiming to want her. Here is the tragic paradox at the center of Marilyn Monroe's life, the impossible situation that her nervous system could never seem to resolve. Her heart desperately wanted safety, but her nervous system often rejected it. Every time she encountered genuine kindness, real stability, a man who might actually stay without demanding performance or perfection or endless proving, something in her system could hit the panic button. Her heart would plead, "This is what you need. This is what will save you. This is what love is supposed to be." But her nervous system, running on code written in childhood trauma, might scream, "Danger, unfamiliar, wrong, trap, run." And the nervous system usually wins that fight. Because the nervous system operates below consciousness, below logic, below what we think we want or believe we deserve. It operates in the realm of survival. And survival doesn't care about happiness or health or building a good life. Survival cares about one thing: responding to patterns the way we learn to respond in childhood. For Marilyn, this meant her entire adult life seems to have been a war between what she consciously wanted and what her unconscious system would allow her to have. She wanted a man who would cherish her, see her, stay, but every time a man like that appeared, her system might reject him as untrustworthy, precisely because he was trustworthy. The lack of chaos could feel like a red flag. The absence of drama might feel like something missing. The steady, boring, beautiful safety of real love could feel like wearing clothes that don't fit, like speaking a language you never learned, like trying to sleep in a bed that's too soft when you've spent your whole life on concrete. So she kept returning to the familiar pain, kept choosing men who would hurt her in predictable ways, kept recreating the abandonment she feared most, as if by controlling the timing and method of the pain, she could somehow master it, could somehow turn the abandonment she experienced into abandonment she chose. But you can't heal trauma by recreating it, you can only deepen it. And with each destructive relationship, with each man who confirmed her worst beliefs about her own unworthiness, the pattern carved itself deeper into her system until there was almost nothing left of the woman who in some other life might have learned what real love felt like. The pills she took, the increasing dependence that worried everyone around her, that wasn't weakness, it was the only tool she had to quiet a nervous system that was constantly screaming. When your brain is stuck in fight or flight, when every moment feels like waiting for the other shoe to drop, when safety itself feels dangerous, you need something to make it stop. And Marilyn found what millions of traumatized people find, that chemicals can do what human connection can't. They can force your nervous system to calm down, even if just for a few hours, even if the price gets higher every time. Marilyn Monroe's story shows what can happen when a nervous system is trained for danger and never given consistent safety long enough to relearn peace. She lived in a world that had no idea how to help someone whose nervous system had been wired for self-destruction before she was old enough to speak. The people around her, even the ones who genuinely cared, didn't understand that you can't logic someone out of a trauma response, what you can't convince a hijacked nervous system to calm down by explaining that it's safe. The nervous system doesn't speak the language of words, it speaks the language of experience, and Marilyn's experience had taught it that safety was a lie. Today we know more about trauma, about attachment, about how childhood experiences wire the nervous system for decades to come. We have words like complex PTSD and attachment disorder and nervous system dysregulation. We understand, at least in theory, that abuse survivors often return to difficult relationships not because they're unintelligent, but because their systems are doing exactly what they were trained to do. We know that leaving a destructive relationship often requires not just courage but neurological rewiring, that safety needs to be learned like a language, practiced like a skill, experienced consistently enough that the nervous system slowly, painfully, begins to trust it. But in 1962, none of that language existed. There was no framework for understanding why someone as beautiful and famous and desired as Marilyn Monroe kept choosing men who destroyed her. There was only judgment, confusion, the cruel assumption that she must want the pain, must be broken in some fundamental way that made her unsavable. And Marilyn, reading that judgment, likely internalized it as one more confirmation of what her nervous system had always believed, that she was, at her core, too damaged to be loved the right way. So when we look at Marilyn Monroe's life, when we examine the pattern of dangerous men and destructive relationships and the slow tragedy of a woman everyone wanted but no one truly knew how to save, we need to ask a different question than the ones usually asked, not who hurt her, though many did, not why didn't she leave, though she tried, not what was wrong with her, though plenty thought they knew. The question we should ask is this: what would it take to live in a world where traumatized children grow into adults whose nervous systems know how to recognize real love? What would it take to build a society that understands that abuse isn't just physical violence, that neglect carves scars deeper than bruises, that being passed from home to home teaches lessons about worthlessness that can echo across a lifetime? What would it take to help people whose brains were wired for chaos learn the foreign language of peace before it's too late? Because Marilyn Monroe's story isn't just about one woman and her tragic choices, it's about millions of people walking around with nervous systems calibrated to danger, mistaking intensity for intimacy, confusing control for care, rejecting safety because safety feels wrong. It's about foster children and abuse survivors, and anyone who learned too young that love comes with conditions, that people leave, that you are fundamentally alone in a world that will hurt you over and over unless you learn to hurt yourself first. Marilyn chose dangerous men, but she didn't choose the nervous system that made dangerous feel safe. She didn't choose the childhood that wired her brain to reject the very thing she needed most. She didn't choose to live in a world that consumed her image while ignoring her pain, that wanted her body while dismissing her mind, that made her famous while ensuring she would always be alone. Her heart wanted safety, her nervous system rejected it, and in the end, that contradiction killed her. Not quickly, not all at once, but slowly, relationship by relationship, pill by pill, night by night, until there was nothing left but the image we remember and the woman we failed to save. In the next video, we'll explore something even harder to accept: why truly safe love often feels boring, suspicious, or even repulsive to traumatized brains. Because once you understand that, Marilyn Monroe stops being a mystery and becomes a warning. A warning about what happens when we build a world that creates trauma faster than it can heal it. A warning about the cost of ignoring pain until it becomes too big to survive. A warning we still refuse to hear. If you've ever confused intensity with love, you're not alone. Share this with someone who needs the language for what they've felt.